Hi everyone, I'm Gary, and this is the first, I suppose, episode of Powered by JEM. So the first in a series of videos in which I'm going to try and explain my role-playing system, Journeyman Expert Master, or JEM for short. So JEM is a classless rules medium game that's designed to have a really broad chassis onto which you can kind of bolt as much as you like, and the game can take the strain regardless of what your kind of intended setting or tone is. And when I've been kind of like designing and writing the game over the course of the last year or so, playtesting it, I've really lost track of the number of mechanical inspirations from other games that have influenced JEM's final system. But I'll probably mention a few as I go through this because I think it's really important. The game is genreless and therefore can be used with any setting. And the two example settings that are in the core rulebook, which I've played a lot of and playtested a lot of, and a couple of groups have over the last year, heroic fantasy, which are for your kind of like standard fantasy adventuring. We know the flavor. And then Lovecraftian horror, which is 1920s mystery, really different. They're both fully realized settings in the core book, and the reason that I chose those two is because they are so different and they can show you what JEM can do. So just a couple of things, a couple of kind of mental housekeeping things to do first of all. But when it came to writing JEM, there was a couple of golden rules that I had, that things that I kind of completely refused to negotiate on, that I think have really made the game as brilliant as what it is and have helped produce this really flexible system. So firstly, I wanted the game to be classless, focusing on the number of skills rather than shoehorning players into specific and unchanging roles throughout the game. Now, this is just the sort of game that I like, right? I really love kind of like skill-based games. My kind of like jam is Woofer, but I love games like Traveller, RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu. Whenever I get a new game and I open it up and I look at the character sheet and there's like a million different skills, I'm like, yeah, I can't wait to see what's going to happen here. I do appreciate though that some game masters, especially those coming at JEM from other more, shall we say, more popular games, might prefer class-based systems, and that is the traditional way of doing fantasy games. Well, I'm just going to say, lay it out very quickly, that JEM lets you enforce those classes if you like. And the second golden rule that I had was that no matter what dice you're rolling, it's always better for you to roll high. JEM was partly kind of born out of frustrations that I had with the prevailing OSR mindset. Firstly, that because older games were, sequentially designed by multiple people, like, what's a good example? Like Anderson and Gygax write OD&D, and then Holmes writes Basic, and then Moldvay writes BX, and Mentor writes Beckme, and then there's all these systems that are sort of built on top of each other, like laying foundations over an old basement, and then after years and years and years, these strange idiosyncrasies, like rolling a d6 and wanting to roll low for searching, or rolling a d20 and wanting to roll high to hit something, or rolling a percentile die to climb walls, or rolling a d20 and wanting to roll under your stat for a kind of like ability check. Well, all of those things, I don't, sometimes I don't mind that sort of thing. It's charming, and sometimes kind of like, those differing idiosyncratic uniquenesses can kind of contribute to the enjoyment and tone of the game at the table. But after running many years, after running games for many years, I found that increasingly players just want, task resolution to be uniform. They want, one mechanic. They'd be happy to different things having different mechanics, but they basically want task resolution to be this, be the same across the system. Makes it easier to pass and easier to teach, and that's something that JEM does. When you roll you roll a d20 to make a test, you want to roll high, and you always know what you need to roll before you roll. The target numbers are set by your experience level and your proficiency level, and not kind of the game master's fiat. Finally, the final golden rule I think is really important is that there's one resource in JEM, one currency that is used for every special ability or talent, right? And in JEM, that's FP, fatigue points, which sits alongside HP. I found that with some systems, it kind of becomes a bit of a headache as a game master to kind of to kind of manage all the players' strange kind of meta currencies and resources, right? You know what I'm talking about when games have like spell slots and sorcery points and superior die and inspiration die and luck points and sanity points and key points and blah blah blah, rages per day and all that kind of stuff. And it just becomes too much. Like I just can't. I'm getting too old. I don't have time to kind of manage all that stuff. And to some extent, I think my players, which are also getting older, it's a lot to ask them to kind of track all this stuff. When I was reflecting on making this video with a friend recently, he played a barbarian in my 5e game for years, and he was like, you know what? I never tried how many times a day I raged. And he's not a lazy person, and he doesn't want to be a bad player. He's just like, it's just I can't keep on top of it all, right? So in JEM, all of those things, special moves in combat, rerolls, casting spells, turning undead, anything like that are all handled by one universal resource, which is FP, fatigue points. So they're the 3 golden rules, you know, classless, skill-based, no matter what dice you roll high, and 1 resource for everything, FP. So let's have a look at the game itself. The thing to start out probably with is proficiency levels. The core mechanic in JEM, that is the core task resolution system, is the test. You want to shoot something in combat, it's a test. You want to search a murder scene for clues, it's a test. You want to take control of a plane as it enters a nosedive and try and kind of stop that from happening, well, that's a test. And the way the character makes a test is really simple. You roll a d20 and compare whether the result is equal to or higher than your target number for your current proficiency level. And in JEM, every character has, regardless of the campaign, regardless of the setting, regardless of your preferences, while a game master can change the number of skills, and there's 30 to a campaign, you know, in some campaigns you might have like firearms, in others you might just have like range, for example. In some you might have spellcasting, in some you might have pilot aircraft or drive digging vehicle or use vac suit, right? There's lots of different things you can have. Well, there's 30 of those. There's 5 core attributes that just stay the same regardless of the setting. And they are strength, agility, endurance, intellect, and personality. And all skills and core attributes have a proficiency level which is ranked from U to G. You have U, which is untrained, T, which is trained, J, which is journeyman, E, which is expert, M, which is master, and G, which is grandmaster. And the target number for any test of a proficiency level is determined by the character's overall experience level. So I'll just show you the target numbers now for each level from levels 1 through to 30, which is the maximum level for characters in JEM. So here's the 2 experience paths. You get to choose an experience path. I'll explain those in a moment. But basically, you can see what at level 1, someone's got 4 hit points, 6 FP, they get to choose 2 talents, and then what the number on D20 they need for each skill. So if they've got strength at trained, they need a 13 to succeed. If they've got expert, they need an 11. They'll probably have a variety of different skills at different proficiency levels, and you can see what they get as they level up. And as they level up, for example, when they get to 5th level, these numbers all come down by 1. The difference between the experience paths, it's just something that is a kind of minor point of customization. When you make a character, you get to choose whether they're a jack or a specialist. This isn't a class. This just affects their target numbers. And basically, you can see a character who is a jack has a better untrained but a worse target number for all their other proficiencies, whereas a specialist has a worse untrained but a better for all their other target numbers. Most characters, most monsters in the game just work off the kind of the jack list, and that makes it really nice and easy to understand. Now, a game master can can modify those target numbers. They can put certain situational modifiers on these tests, but most of the time you're making just a standard, it's called simple test. It's really easy if the player knows whether they've passed or failed immediately. It's really helpful, especially if you are like me and you play a bit online. I don't always play online, but it's helpful when I do, where I can just go, right, make your melee test, and the players can just tell me whether they pass or not. They don't have to do all that cross-reference with like, oh, what's this armor class, or what's this armor points. Don't have to roll for a location. It's just they know straight away they passed or failed. What I found while playing this is that the game moves really quickly because you don't need to kind of like broadcast the target DC or anything like that. Character isn't rolling the dice and then adding a bunch of modifiers and asking you whether they succeeded or not. They're just able to tell you. You can, as a DM, make it harder or easier. There's kind of difficulty levels. So if you say it's easy, it means they get +3. If you say it's hard, they get -3, for example. I just find that this is a real godsend when playing online. So that's the core mechanic of JEM. D20, roll high, gets your target number. Let's take a look at characters and how those work. So when you first start to make a character, you have to choose a heritage. And a heritage is a sort of character's background and can mean different things depending on the focus of the campaign. So for example, in the heroic fantasy setting, it's basically your species. It's your race. You're either a human, an elf, a dwarf, etc. And whereas in the Lovecraftian horror setting, it's where you come from and your social class, right? Because you're investigators in the 1920s, and whether you're upper or middle or working class, and whether you're a member of the British gentry, for example, or a veteran of the First World War, they're all factored into heritages. Heritages give you a couple of things like improving your base proficiency levels and your core attributes and a couple of skills, and might give you access to certain talents. So, for example, elves can see in the dark. That's one of their that's one of their heritage talents, which brings me on to talents really nicely. So talents are I think, the most fun part of the game. I'm a really self-professed lover of everything that's OSR and indie in the kind of like role-playing space and our space. But one thing has increasingly irked me over the last few years is that new and interesting games, there's a kind of continued prevalence for minimalism, right? Specifically when it comes to players choosing cool stuff for their characters to do. This idea that when they level up, they get like a couple of hit points. So it's like, right, now it's another like 50,000 XP to the next level. And I get that as game masters, that gives us a really tight control over the expected power levels and makes it really easy to manage. But I find, having played, every edition of D&D, run campaigns for every edition of D&D, every edition of many other games, it just becomes increasingly frustrating for the players if they feel like they don't get to choose anything when they level up, right? The players like to choose things. Some of my players are power gamers and they like to be able to choose stuff. And it's part of the game master's responsibility to make sure that if you're playing a game where you gain experience points and you level up, that's actually satisfying and interesting in some ways. So that's where talents come in. Now, talents in GEM are the mechanical progression that a player gets when they level up. They start with 2, they get 1 every level, and they get 2 every 5 levels. Talents let you do things like cast spells or turn undead or perform extra attacks in melee. In Lovecraftian horror, they might do things like give a character more kind of like mental stability, or let them progress in their career, or increase their wealth and their influence or kind of like develop their other competencies. Talents in GEM are organized into talents trees, and I'll show you a couple now. We'll start with the heroic fantasy talent tree. So this is the fighter talent tree, and characters always start at the bottom. So if they took warrior initiative as their first talent, you can take 2 talents at first level. They could take accurate strike, and then when they level up, they can go shield bash or brutal smash or marksman initiate. And each of these things give them more and more abilities. Brutal smash allows them to do more damage. Marksman gives their ability with ranged. Going right up to the top, and they get more and more proficient at these things. The Path of the Wizard, for example. The Path of the Wizard allows a character to increase their competency with spell casting, learn more spells, be better at casting those spells that they've got, use fewer FP to cast spells. It's all about allowing characters to customize who they are. Now, obviously, these different paths for heroic fantasy are inspired quite strongly by the kind of classic classes. And if a game master wanted, they can just say, well, you can only take the talents from one class. You can't, from one path, sorry, and that would enforce a kind of class restriction. But there's nothing to stop a character from taking, the first one in fighter and then one in cleric, for example, which is sort of how multi-classing would work in GEM. Let's have a look at the Lovecraftian horror talents. Which are also really, really interesting. So obviously Lovecraftian horror is a really, really different sort of setting, and in that you have more like careers. So, for example, here's the one for the academic intern, preliminary reading, doctoral researchers. These give characters access to academic libraries or positions of power within academia, or extremely specific knowledge about one specific thing. Another one, let's have a look at the law enforcer, which is, if characters want to play police officers. Really, really interesting, right? They're going to get a couple of combat skills from each talent, but they're also going to maybe develop quite a few social skills, because they've got to interview different criminals and different suspects and things like that. Let's just take a quick look at dramatic concepts, which I think, the last thing that really worth talking about. So obviously GEM contains all the rules for running things like combat and experience points and how to deal with different situations. But one thing that makes GEM really, really impressive and important to me is this idea of dramatic concepts. And what dramatic concepts are, and they are different rules modifications that have all been tested, which modify the game in a significant way. They're a kind of an index of optional rules. So just like looking, we've got bell curve tests, which change the way the core test mechanic works from using a d20 to 3d8, and how that would affect the kind of outcome of certain things. Things like brutal injuries, right? If you don't want to, unconscious at 0, but you want damage to affect, with the lingering injuries, allowing people to get kind of like missing hands or eyes poked out, things like that, pretty brutal things like that. That's where you just say, well, we're going to use the brutal injuries dramatic concept, and that would work straight out of the box in the game. Goals experience, things that affect the narrative flow of the game, like press tests, which allow characters to re-roll any failed test. So that just about It covers like everything in this like really short whistle-stop kind of tour of the game. There's loads more stuff to show you, but hopefully it helps cover as much of it as possible and just gets you kind of interested in playing this game. Now, hope you found it informative and interesting. I'll come back soon, and what we'll do is we'll create a character for Heroic Fantasy so you can see how it all comes together. But otherwise, thanks for listening, and I'll speak again soon.